Hi guys, welcome to my video and my YouTube channel. I think we should try and make another one of those more in-depth videos like I did the last time. A lot of people seem to like it, so let's just try and make a new one. This time I will talk about level scaling for the enemies, for Gorm and for the equipment. It will be super exciting and it's a really interesting topic to talk about because so many games are doing it in so many different ways. So now you will know how I'm doing it. And before we start, remember to check out my Twitter, my Discord and my Patreon. And most important of all, remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel to get all the new stuff about this game and the development. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee and some popcorn, and I will tell you the story about how I made these enemies even more fun to fight against. Okay, so my kids have been asking me for a long time if I want to do a health bar for the enemies, so they could kind of see how much health the enemies have left. And I didn't want to do it because the philosophy for this game is kind of old school. You know, games like Wonder Boy, where the green enemy takes 2 hits to kill, the blue enemy takes 3 hits to kill, the red enemy takes 5 hits to kill, right? That was kind of my idea for the system in this game. And then I would make some elite enemies that was a lot tougher, like mini bosses. And then I would have the big boss fights, right? And on the other side of that, I also wanted the player to be able to find new and better gear. So I made the rarity system with common, rare, epic and legendary gear you could find. And those two systems, the weapon system and the enemy system, just don't match up at all. You could be very lucky and find a legendary armor or legendary weapon in the beginning of the game, and then the whole playthrough would be fairly easy for you because you are kind of overpowered compared to the enemies. I mean, the strongest legendary weapon you can find is doing 10 or 12 damage, I think, and that's it. That's maximum damage you can get from a weapon. And it didn't go higher than that because that would really make the game very unbalanced. So I kept fighting the system with me wanting better gear, but I also want you to know all the enemies. So this armored spider is taking this many hits to kill, right? Kind of keeping the enemy system clean like in the old days. But then on top of that, having an advanced weapon system where you want different weapons that do different damage. I mean, it didn't work. So I decided to work on the enemy health bar anyways. I mean, it's a very good exercise and I really hate widgets and I have problems communicating from widgets to blueprints and the other way around. So it would be a really good exercise for me to do, to learn more about widgets. And that just led me down a very deep rabbit hole and everything just escalated and got completely out of hand because a simple health bar over the enemies just wasn't enough. It didn't give me anything. So of course I had to expand it with the enemy name and the enemy level, and if it was an elite enemy you had to be able to see that too. So it just escalated very quickly, and that was how I started on the whole level scaling system, which I will get into in a second. And while I was working on this health bar and this enemy level system, I also started working on the weapon. I had to because one didn't really work without the other, so I had to work on these two things at the same time to make any sense of it. And as if that wasn't enough, I also created some new weapons. I was playing around in Blender trying to learn the program, and I ended up creating a few weapons like a spear and an axe and also a mace, and I put this into the weapon system too. Right now these new weapons are just working exactly like the sword does, but I made them anyways and I put them into the mesh list of the weapons, and it just gave a lot of new and great variation to the weapons and to the gear. But let's get back to the enemy health bar and take a look at what I have created. So this is the first iteration of the health bar I made, and I have no idea why there are stripes on it and why those stripes are animated. I tried to remove it, but I just couldn't. So the enemy health bar is animated with stripes. And again, this health bar didn't do a lot to me. So I put in the enemy name so you can see what enemy you were facing, right? But again, that also didn't really do anything. It wasn't very satisfying. But as soon as I added the enemy level number, then everything just changed immediately. Immediately. Get over here immediately now. What I meant to say is that from that point on, I knew I had to make enemy levels. So I started on that. So in the widget, I made the health bar, I made the enemy name, and I made the enemy level. And I bind those two variables in the widget. Alright? Then in the enemy blueprint, I cast to the health bar widget, and then I set those variables I just created. I set them to the same variable as the enemy has. And the variables that the enemies have, I will get by doing some math calculation. I hate math, it doesn't make any sense to me, but I'm trying to keep it simple. So I make these calculations to get the different variables, to get the health and to get the damage and to get the level, to get things like that, so I can hook it up and tell the widget that these are the numbers you have to use. And that went fairly easy. Just create the same variables in the enemy that you have in the widget, and then just set the widget variables to the same as the enemies. Does that even make any sense? I'm not sure if this is the way to do it, but this is the way I'm doing it. So I make these calculations for the health and for the damage based on the level of the enemy. And the level of the enemy is calculated based on the level of Gorm, the player character, right? So every time the player gets stronger, the enemies will get stronger too. I want the enemies to be around 5 levels from Gorm, right? So if Gorm is level 10, then I can spawn enemies that are level 5 to level 15, right? So I will meet fairly easier enemies and I will meet harder enemies. So I get Gorm's level, and from that I will get from -5 to +5, and I will get a level roll. I call that a level roll. That is the level the enemy rolled, right? And then, because I can't have a spider that is level -2, so when Gorm starts out as level 1, I don't want minus enemies. That makes sense, right? So I make this calculation. So everything that is 1 or below 1, if the level roll is 1 or below 1, I will just set it to 1. And also for the first 5 levels, I don't want Gorm to meet higher level enemies than the level he is himself. So when Gorm is level 1, I don't want him to meet a level 6 enemy. That is too much too soon. So I make a calculation that prevents that here. So if Gorm is level 5 or below, I will get Gorm's level and put that into the max random, and then I will set the minimum to 1. Which means that enemies will spawn in the range of 1 to Gorm's level, right? That's another enemy level calculation I do whenever Gorm is below level 5 or equal level 5. When he's above level 5, the other calculation that I showed you before will kind of take over from there. At least that's how I see it, and I might be doing this wrong, and maybe I'm doing a double calculation. I don't know. It works. So when it comes to calculating the health, I start by getting the max health, which is a variable that I can set like a starter health. And the starter health will be different for elite enemies and different type of enemies. So I need to be able to set that from the beginning. And then I take the enemy level and I multiply that with another variable, which is how much I want the enemy to increase for each level in health. And I add that to the starter max health. And that will get me the max health and the current health, which needs to be the same when the enemy spawns. It just basically means that the higher level the enemy is, the more health it will have when it spawns. Simple as that, really. And I do the exact same thing to calculate the damage. I have a base damage, and then I take the level and multiply that with a number I want it to increase for each level, right? In this case, the number is 2. So for each level, I will multiply the level with 2, right? So if it's a level 10 enemy, then it will do 20 damage. If it's a level 100 enemy, it will do 200 damage. And then I add the start damage variable. But that gets kind of pointless the higher the enemy increases in level. I mean, this is what I think happens. I'm not really sure if that is exactly what happens, but it feels like the enemy health and the damage are scaling fine. So for example, when Gorm is level 15, he can meet enemies that are from level 10 to level 20, right? And when he meets a level 20 enemy, it is a challenge for him. And on top of that, I have the elite enemies, which will have a much higher starting health and a much higher starting damage. And if Gorm meets an elite, which is 5 level higher than himself, then he has a lot of problems. This should be a very hard enemy, and it is. He could also meet a level 10 elite enemy. It should still be dangerous, but not as dangerous as a level 20 elite enemy, right? I mean, it should all make perfect sense. And speaking of elite enemies, when an elite enemy spawns, the health bar will tell you that it's an elite enemy, so you know it. And again, on top of that, I have made a skull for the health bar, and this skull will tell you that the enemy can kill you with one hit if you're not careful. And what this skull is actually doing is that when the enemy is in the chase state, it will look at Gorm, it will get his health and defense and armor rating, and the enemy will subtract that from its own attack damage. And if that is 0 or less, that means that he will kill Gorm in one hit. So I will show the skull. Right. If it's above 0, then it means that it won't kill Gorm in one hit, and I will hide the skull so you don't see it. So when you meet an enemy that has a skull, you know he can kill you with one hit, so be careful. On top of that, I have the 1. If Gorm's health is 1 or below 1, then the enemy can also kill you. Okay, so the situation is that you can get an armor which has a much higher armor rating than the enemy damage, which means that the enemy shouldn't be able to damage Gorm. But if this is the case, the enemy will always hit Gorm for 1 hit point. And no matter how much armor he has, he will always lose 1 hit point. So there's some calculation for that also. You can look at it. I mean, it's been a few weeks since I made this, and I'm already losing track of what's going on here. That is my constant challenge I have with with these blueprints. I can't be away from too long before I kind of completely lose the overview of what's going on here. And I can't remember what I did and why I did this, but so yeah. Anyways, that's just how it is. So the bottom line is that I have a very cool enemy level scaling system now, which means that I can still meet a slime that is very dangerous to me if I haven't got the right equipment. So any slime can kill me now, but also if I have fairly good equipment, I can still feel overpowered and meet enemies that I can kill fairly easy. So that it goes to the both end of the spectrum, right? I can meet enemies that I need to really be careful about, and I can also meet enemies that I can just run down super fast. And again, that is also due to the new equipment system I have made. I will get into that in a second. It also means that now I can kind of just play forever. There's no end stop to the leveling. I can just level on, and the enemies and the gear will level with me, so I can just kind of play forever, right? And I have always had some issues with this kind of system, just like for example in Borderlands. It doesn't matter if you're level 5 or if you're level 40, the time it takes to kill the enemies are still the same. I mean, it's the same, it doesn't really matter. The numbers gets higher, but nothing really changed. And with Borderlands, for example, when you find a new weapon, it's rarely much better than the weapon you had before. So you're super slowly increasing in damage. What I want is you should be able to find a really powerful weapon and feel super powerful for a certain amount of time before the world out levels you, and then you have to find a new one, right? But I want you to find something cool and feel super overpowered, if not just for a short moment, right? But again, I have to mention Diablo 2. I haven't played it for so many years, but as far as I remember, there were times in that game where I found an awesome weapon, and I had that for a long time. Just when I got it, I felt super overpowered, so I kept the weapon for a very long time. And that is kind of what I want, right? I want you to find something that you really like and then just hold on to it as long as you can until the weapon just can't keep up with the enemies anymore. Then you have to change it to something else, unless there's an upgrade system where you can upgrade the weapon you like. I'm getting off topic here, but again, with the system I have now, including the weapon stuff we will get to later, I can be lucky and find a super awesome weapon right in the beginning, and I can feel overpowered for a long time, but at some point the enemies will catch up to me and the weapon won't be sufficient enough, right? I need to find a better weapon. But at least I feel overpowered for a good amount of time, and at the same time I can also feel very underpowered if I don't get the right equipment. So I'm getting the best of both ends, I think, and I'm actually really satisfied with how all this turned out. So now let's talk about what I have added for the weapon, which is also of course the weapon level. I'm doing the same thing as I do with the enemy. I'm calculating the weapon level, and based on the level I will calculate the amount of damage the weapon can do. So I'm calculating the weapon level the same way I'm calculating the enemy level. I do it from getting the player character's level and then do calculation from that. When I have the weapon level, I will get a random integer from -5 or +5 from the weapon level, and that will be the damage. And on top of that, if it's a common, rare, epic or legendary, I will add bonus damage to that. And that is basically it. That means that the weapons will overlap, so I can actually get a common weapon that is better than a rare weapon, right? But the rare weapon will also have the bonus attached to it. that the common weapon doesn't have. But sometimes you can get a common weapon that is much better than the rare you have, and I also kind of like that. That means that the common weapon will still be relevant, at least in the beginning, until you're all decked out with rare and legendary equipment. Then common gear means nothing, right? That's how it is in all games. But in the beginning, common should be very useful. You should not ignore that by any means. So that new system combined with the new weapons I have, the maces and the axes and the spears, I'm already having a pretty interesting weapon system. I even also made so that the particles around the weapon pickup will have the correct color. So if it's a legendary weapon you can pick up, the particles around the pickup will be orange. And it just, when you come into a shop and you see these different weapons and different colors, and so you run up to the blue weapon to see what kind of epic weapon it is, right? And you're ignoring the gray ones. It's super cool, guys, and I'm super happy about how all this turned out. And I did the same for the armor and the shields. And for now it's only armor rating and damage and stuff that I calculate from the level, but it could be much more than that later on. But for now it's just damage and armor rating, and that's more than enough for me to have a lot of fun with this. So the bad news is that I have removed the magical gloves from the game, because I kind of feel like I have painted myself into a corner with these magic gloves and all these magic abilities, because it's such a big system, and there's so much widget and menu work going into this. The whole idea was that each magic ability would have multiple things you can upgrade, right? Like if it's a firewall, you could upgrade the firewall length and the damage, and you could also upgrade how long the enemy will burn and the cooldown, and so many things for each ability. And it just took so long to just do it on the firewall that I kind of completely lost motivation to do it on the rest of the abilities. And at the same time, when I was working on this gear system with the leveling and all that, finding a magic glove was just super anticlimactic, because the gloves and the damage on the abilities and stuff didn't scale with the level like the shield and the weapons were doing. So the gloves just became completely useless after a few levels. So right now I just removed all gloves from the game. So now you can get armor, you can get shield, and you can get weapons. And that's it. And this is all to keep the game fun to play, right? I don't want to find stuff in a chest that I can't use because it's useless, it's underpowered. So I just remove it if it's not fun. And right now the gloves and the magic abilities are not fun. And again, I'm strongly considering completely getting rid of the magic abilities for the game, because it's just such a big task, again with menus and widgets, and I have just completely lost the overview of how to get this up and running. I have thought about making some potions you could pick up and throw at the enemies, like a poison potion that would make a poison explosion, and maybe you could pick up magic scrolls that will fire off some of these magic abilities, like lightning strikes and firewalls and stuff like that, so I can kind of keep it out of the gloves, out of the menu systems and upgrade system, so it's just kind of one-offs that you find. That's what I've been thinking about. And then on the other hand, the magic abilities are some of the most fun I've had working on this game. Like the last ability I worked on was this rolling rock or rolling stone or whatever you want to call it, that just fires off and rolls along the ground and hits everything in its way. And it's super fun to work on these abilities, so I would be really sad to see all this magic go away. But again, if it's not fun, if it's not as fun as the other stuff in the game, if it's falling behind, then I see no reason to have it, right? So it might be one of the things I will have to cut. I'm not sure yet. I really don't want to, but I also really don't know where to start with this again. So yeah, one thing is for sure, I need to focus on this gear system right now and get the armor and shield and weapon and enemies to play as good as it can, and kind of it needs to be super satisfying before I even start on the gloves and the magic again. And cutting the magic from the game has kind of toned in my focus, right? I don't have so much around my ears anymore, so I can just go into detail with what I have right now. So yeah, that is all I wanted to talk about for this video. It was quite a mouthful, but and it's really hard to talk and explain this stuff that I've forgot most of it now that I'm doing the video, right? But it's super interesting, I think, and I'm really happy that so many people liked the video I did before with the dungeon clutter and all that. So this was another fairly in-depth video on the level scaling in the game, and I hope you all enjoyed watching this video, and let me know what you think in the comments below, and see you next time.